John's father has 3 sons. There's Jack, a quiet, intelligent student. Then there's Jason, a popular athlete. So who's the 3rd son? It's John. His father has 3 sons, Jack, Jason, and him, John. One day, a teacher decided to give her students a test, but all of them refused to take it. She could give detention for skipping the test to only one student. All of them knew each other's names. If a student knew they were going to get a detention, they agreed to take the test. How could the teacher make all the students participate? She told them that she'd give detention to the student whose name came first alphabetically. Then this person wouldn't skip the test. The next person on the list wouldn't skip as well, and so on until the end of the list. Randy was at home, sitting in his chair with a book. Suddenly, his sister's super expensive vase fell and broke in the living room. He ran there in time to see a stranger jump out of the window and run away. Randy tried to chase him, but his glasses fogged up because of the cold, so he couldn't see the person. When the police arrived, they immediately knew he was lying. He'd broken the vase himself. How did they know? Glasses don't fog up when you go from a warm room to the cold outdoors. It's the other way around. Michael Winston, who dislikes modern art, rushed into the city gallery and caused millions of dollars worth of damage to several paintings. Yet, the manager of the gallery thanked Mr. Winston for his actions. How come? Michael was a firefighter. The water from his hose damaged several masterpieces, but he still managed to extinguish the fire and save many more exhibits. Look at this line of people at the checkout in a supermarket. They're all a colorful bunch, but one of them is trying to sneak out food out of the store. Can you tell who just by looking at them closely? You might have thought it was the pregnant woman because of the fake tummy, but look! She's wearing comfy sneakers without shoelaces so that she could slip them on easily. The guy in a baggy hoodie sure looks suspicious, but it's not food he's hiding inside his pockets. It's a kitten. And the real culprit is the guy behind him. Look at his sleeves. One of his arms looks way bigger than the other. He must be hiding something in there. A man dressed in black from head to toe was walking in the middle of the road. All of a sudden, a huge black car with its headlights off came around the corner and screeched to a halt, not to hit him. How on earth did the driver of the car see the man in black? Well, the only reasonable answer would be that it was in broad daylight. Nobody said it was nighttime after all. 3 college friends met after a summer break and were sharing stories about their vacation. Lily described how she and her boyfriend had gone to Paris and seen the city from the top of the Eiffel Tower. Dylan told his friends that he had traveled to Africa with his parents. But on their last day, there was a massive volcanic eruption, and it didn't spoil their vacation only because they flew home that day. And Ellie said that she had visited her uncle in Texas and learned how to ride a horse. One of the stories was fake though. Which one? Dylan's story is fake. He couldn't fly home on the day of the eruption because when something like this happens, all flights get cancelled. Mark and Amy got stranded on a tiny uninhabited island full of sand and rocks, but not much else. They had no radio or cell phones, and there were no trees on the island to make a smoke signal. Suddenly, Amy noticed a plane circling the sky in search of them. She got a bright idea to make it notice them. Soon after, the plane picked them up. What was Amy's idea? She suggested using rocks to spell out SOS on the sand. Mike was studying for a big test in the school library. It was already late when he finished up and suddenly heard someone shouting for help. The voice was coming from behind a locked classroom door. Mike rushed there and opened it. Inside, there was his classmate, Brad. He told Mike that he'd gone to grab a bite in the cafeteria, only to find it was closed that day. Suddenly, he blacked out. And the next thing he knew, he was locked in the classroom. Mike promised to find out who had done this. By morning, Mike had 4 suspects in mind. When school started, he interrogated them. Matthew told him he'd been doing his homework in a classroom. Emily said that she'd been with Matthew, but later she'd gone home. Olivia claimed that she'd been having lunch in the cafeteria, and Chris explained that he'd been sick that day. It took Mike no time to figure out who was guilty. It was Olivia. She couldn't have been eating lunch in the cafeteria because it was closed that day. Clara was in her hotel room when she heard someone knock on the door. She looked through the peephole and saw an unfamiliar man. He said, "Hi, I'm the hotel manager. Sorry to bother you, but our database has crashed. Could you let me in to confirm some information?" Clara immediately rushed to her phone and called hotel security. Can you figure out why? The badge on the man's chest says Chloe Smith, and that's a female name. She knew the man was a fake manager. Emma's mother asked the girl to go to the supermarket and gave her a shopping list and a bank card. But in case Emma forgot the card's PIN, her mom also gave her a little clue. When Emma was already at the checkout, she took the clue out of her pocket and immediately recalled the code. Can you say what number it was if the clue was a sheet of paper with a fly, a cat, a girl, and a snake drawn on it? The PIN was 6420. Emma just had to count the number of legs of each creature. Littlefield was a tiny village where nothing ever happened. But one day, Mr. Richardson, a rich farmer, arrived at the police station in tears, saying that 2 of his best cows were missing. There were 3 suspects, and each of them had to answer one question. "Have you taken your neighbor's animals?" Mr. Anderson said that he and Mr. Richardson had a common business and that he wouldn't risk their partnership. Mrs. Martinez stated that she'd been living in this village since birth and she wouldn't spoil her reputation because of some animals. And Mr. Jones explained that his family had been breeding pigs for centuries, and he didn't have any reason to steal cows. The police officer figured out who the criminal was. Can you? The thief is Mr. Jones. How did he know that it was cows that were stolen? Nobody had told him the animal species. A woman was having breakfast at a nice restaurant. At one moment, she noticed a fly in her coffee. She was indignant and made the waiter bring her another cup. After he returned with a new cup of coffee, she shouted, "What's with this service in this place? You've just brought me the same cup of coffee." How did she understand it? She had already put sugar in her previous cup of coffee. When she tried the new one, it was sweet. There's a barrel of water in the yard. You look inside and see that it's more than half full, but your friend argues that it's less than half full. How to figure out who's right without using any measuring tools or removing water from the barrel? Tilt the barrel so that the water touches its rim. If you can see the bottom, the barrel's less than half full. If the bottom is still covered with water, it's more. Carol was invited to a Halloween party in an abandoned house. Her friends asked if she was up for a challenge, and she said yes. Soon enough, she was locked inside a room. In this room, there was one door and 3 light switches next to it. Behind the door, there was an empty closet with nothing but a light bulb. Her task was to figure out which switch controlled the light bulb inside the closet. She could flip the switches however she wanted, but once she opened the door, she couldn't touch the switches anymore. Sometime later, she managed to get it right. How did Carol do it? Okay, let's go step by step. She flipped switch number 1, then waited for a few minutes. Then, she flipped it back to off and immediately flipped switch number 2. Then, she opened the door and checked the light. It was turned off. So she realized it wasn't switch number 2 that controlled the light. She decided to touch the bulb to test if it was hot or cold. If the bulb was cold, it would mean that switch number 3 controlled it. But the bulb was hot, so that meant that switch number 1 controlled it. Way to go, Carol! To get back to the party, Carol had to solve another riddle. There were 2 hourglasses in front of her. One hourglass measured 7 minutes, and the other measured 4 minutes. She needed to time 9 minutes using both hourglasses. How could she do it? First, she turned over both hourglasses at the same time. By the time the 4-minute hourglass was done, the other one still had 3 minutes left. Carol flipped the 4-minute hourglass over again. By the time the 7-minute hourglass was empty, there was 1 minute left on the other hourglass. And by the time the 4-minute hourglass emptied again, there was 1 minute's worth of sand in the bottom half of the 7-minute timer. She flipped it over again, so there was 1 minute's worth of sand in the top part of the hourglass. And when the 7-minute timer finally emptied again, 9 minutes had passed in total. Phew, that took some work. Someone stole a rare diamond from Mrs. Monica Fraser's house. Mrs. Fraser claimed she'd walked into her bedroom one morning and found that the glass box in her dressing room had been broken and the diamond had been gone. She called a detective, who soon arrived at her place and asked some questions. Based on his inquiries, he gathered 3 suspects. Mrs. Fraser's gardener, Steve, had the key to the house. Her cousin Sophia was staying with her for the week, and the cleaning lady Adeline cleaned the house every day. Steve said he was on holiday that week, so he wasn't anywhere near the house when it had happened. Sophia said she didn't even know her cousin had a diamond hidden in her house. And Adeline said that she'd been cleaning the house at around 10 p.m. the previous night. Everything had seemed all right. Who stole the jewelry? It was the cleaning lady. It seems that right after she broke the glass and stole the diamond, she also wiped off the pieces of glass left on the floor. On a cold winter day, Jason woke up after a medical procedure. He was lying in bed when the doctor walked into his room, saying there were 3 women outside claiming to be his wife. All 3 of them wanted to see Jason, but only his wife was allowed to do so. Look at the women. Which one do you think is telling the truth? The woman wearing a white shirt is the only one that has a ring on her left finger. She's the wife. It was a lazy Sunday morning, and John was having breakfast in the kitchen. Suddenly, he heard glass shattering. He walked into the living room and saw that someone had just broken one of his windows. He was mad and decided to go outside to see if he could find the culprit. There were only 3 people in the street, so he talked to each of them. The first was one of his neighbor's children. He was coming back from his football practice, holding a ball in his hands. He said he'd been going home at the time of the incident. The second person was Stephen, John's neighbor and longtime friend. He was carrying a toolbox. The man said he decided to come home to fix John's window. The last person was Julio, a mailman. He was riding his bike, throwing newspapers on people's front lawns. He said it had been hours since he'd passed John's house. Soon enough, John figured out who had done it. How? It was the mailman. If you look at the lawn, the newspaper is lying on the grass beneath the window. He threw the newspaper towards the mailbox, but missed it, and it hit John's window. Whoops. It was a stormy night. Kate and her boyfriend stayed up late watching a soap opera. In the middle of it, there was a weather forecast. The weather lady said it would keep raining for 2 more days, but in 72 hours, it'd be bright and sunny. Kate turned to her boyfriend and said that the weather lady was wrong, and the girl was right. Why? Because in 72 hours, it will also be nighttime, so it can't possibly be bright and sunny. It was Amelia's dream to go skydiving, but she was afraid of heights. One day, her friend took her to fulfill her dream. Amelia jumped from an airplane without a parachute and didn't get hurt. How is that possible? The plane wasn't flying, it was still on the ground. Duh. Dave, an archaeologist, traveled to Egypt on a very special mission. He spent days excavating ruins hidden under the sand, and the only thing he found was a coin marked 10 BCE. When he showed it to his colleagues, they told him the coin was a fake. Why? Well, because the designation BCE didn't appear until after the beginning of our era. It was raining when Mrs. Moore called the police. She said someone had just bumped into her car and driven away. When the police arrived, the only person next to the place of the incident was a man fixing his tire. Mrs. Moore said that that was the car that had bumped into hers. However, the gentleman said that it couldn't be true because he'd been busy fixing his car the whole time. Can you tell who's lying? It's the guy fixing his car. The rain started just recently. If he'd been fixing his car this whole time, the ground underneath it would be dry. But look, it's wet. This means he's just arrived there and is actually the one responsible for the incident. 4 friends decided to meet up for coffee one afternoon. Someone asked which one of them was the oldest, and they answered with a riddle. Mia is 3 times older than Anna, but 3 years ago, Anna was a year younger than Claudia is now, and Olivia is twice as old as Anna. So can you put the girls into order by age? The correct order is Mia, Olivia, Anna, and Claudia. Here's a quick one. What belongs to you, but others use it more often? Your name. Outside a fancy palace, 2 sentinels were guarding the main gate. They were standing, looking in different directions, one towards the west and the other towards the east. At some point, one of the sentinels asked the other, "What are you smiling about?" How could he know that his colleague was smiling? Well, despite the fact that they were looking in different directions, they weren't standing back to back. They were facing each other. Kevin was away on business and had to spend the night in a hotel. After a full day of meetings, he returned to his room to get some rest. He went to bed but couldn't fall asleep. After tossing and turning in bed for hours, he called someone, didn't say a word, and then finally fell asleep. Who did Kevin call? And how could he finally fall asleep? He called the room next door, as his neighbor was snoring very loudly. The ringing woke the neighbor up, the snoring stopped, and Kevin managed to doze off. You've just come back from a long vacation. There, you bought a new suitcase to store all the new things you got, but you don't remember the code. Luckily, you left yourself a note on your cell phone to help you decipher the code to open the lock. 682. One digit is right and in its place. 614. One digit is right but in the wrong place. 206. Two digits are right but both are in the wrong place. 768. All digits are wrong. 380. One digit is right but in the wrong place. What's the 3-digit code? Zero, 4, 2.